Favorite book or series? So, I was coming in here thinking I was going to tell everybody it was Harry Potter. It's A Song of Ice and Fire. So, and the reason is that it's just got such a amazing history, and Martin is such an amazing writer, and if only he could finish the books, it would be even better. But never gonna happen. Never gonna happen because of the TV series. But that's a rant that we'll get into later on. It's definitely a heck of a lot different going from the TV show to the books, but for me it was a lot better because I had every location, every set piece, every character visually in the book, and I didn't have to think about it in my head. Like, it was just already given to me.
That's the benefit.
Yeah.
Just seeing the movie.
Yep.
Or if it's easier to envision.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I don't have to worry about making my dream cast for this book, which I always have to do, and it's a big mess. But this is the best part about the rant, is that it's so good to me that I don't know how to properly describe it. The first book probably is my favorite, just solely because of how intimately detailed every character is. Like, from touch and go, like, you're in these characters' minds, you're their point of view from the word go, and Martin has a really good way of wrapping you in their head and get you to feel exactly what those characters are feeling. It's a character odyssey, and that's what A Song of Ice and Fire is, outside of just the beautiful, rich world that Martin makes. I mean, especially since it's very, not heavily inspired by Tolkien, but a lot of things can be derived from Tolkien in comparison. But I mean, if there's any character that could get you to read it, Tyrion, of course, would be the main reason to read it. It's always a fan favorite. That's Martin himself inserted into the books, and you just read it for the characters. Read it without worrying about needing to know who's who, because ultimately things will pretty much be cemented into place as you go on. Like, even characters that were introduced later on in the seasons of the show or introduced very early on in the books, like, you don't really have to worry about remembering, who that person was, because it'll all just, either they'll be very short throwaways or they'll be with you through the entire chapter of that particular character. And the food that Martin has in his books make me want to read it even more, to the point where I wanted to know how to make it. And I was so happy that somebody made a book with all of the Game of Thrones cookbook. Like, it is in my house. It is something that I have tried to get to in order to make, because I want to make those lemon cakes that Sansa loves so much. And thankfully, Leah is a better cook than me and actually can cook some of those for me. Haven't tried my hand at mulled wine yet, but that's definitely something for the holidays. And if anything, if it's a cheap shot, read it because I named my daughter after Daenerys, who's my favorite literary character in those books. But that would be my sole reason to have anybody read those books, is for the food, the characters, and for Daenerys Targaryen,
All right, so for my favorite book, I'm going to sit here and gush for a minute, because I have recently changed my favorite book. It was Red Rising. And I still love Red Rising. Still a great series. Still a great series. I even have a tattoo of it on my back.
Honestly, I didn't have a tattoo for it.
Totally needs to become a TV show. Amazing series. But the series that has dethroned Red Rising is The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. Dear God, these books are epic. It is the greatest epic fantasy ever. The most epic fantasy that has ever been.
Still haven't read Game of Thrones.
Okay, you can have your Game of Thrones. You can have your Wheel of Time. You can have your Lord of the Rings. Stormlight reigns supreme. The Way of Kings, the first book, is the greatest first entry in a series that has ever happened. It has fantastic world building, character development. It hits the ground running with absurd amounts of action. The magic system is amazing. It is everything that a first book should be, and more. The second book, The Words of Radiance, is probably the most complete, well-rounded book I've ever read. It has everything any book could have: action, romance, suspense, drama, great character development with Shallan, Kaladin becoming the hero that he is. You finally get to see him be the real hero that he is. In the first book, he fails a lot, which is good for character purposes. But Words of Radiance is just an all-around great, complete experience.
Nobody likes an instant paragon.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Can't have a Mary Sue. Oathbringer is probably the greatest character-driven book I've ever read. The arc and change that Dalinar goes through is unlike anything I've ever seen. I would argue that Dalinar is probably the best developed, most well-rounded, well fleshed out, whatever adjective or whatever you want to give him. He is one of the greatest characters in fantasy history. Oathbringer, that entire book, is basically a masterclass in character development. Stormlight Archive is amazing. Read it!
Now why would we? Why would we?
For all the reasons I just said.
All the reasons you just said?
For everything I just said. Were you not listening? It's epic. It has insane action, great characters. I can't stress that enough. Characters. The world building, when they're, I don't know, if they're walking or when like a wagon is going down the road, the grass actually shrinks into the ground, the wagon passes over, and then the grass comes back up. That's awesome! That's like the smallest detail, but it's awesome.
The motivation of grass is something.
Exactly. That's why you should grass.
Grass.
That's why you should read it.
Now compare that to something like.
There is no comparison.
Let's see. I'd like to have Julianne.
Julianne, like I said, she can have her Lord of the Rings. She can have her Witcher, her Geralt, or however you say his name. Dalinar is Geralt, whatever. Dalinar is the best character ever. Stormlight is great, and we're only 3 books into Stormlight. It's going to be a 10-book series. It's going to be a very long series, but it already has one of the strongest starts a series could possibly have.
Take that for weeks.
Exactly.
Right. So, Julianne, what is your favorite book or series? And if you say anything other than Lord of the Rings, you're lying.
Yeah, this is true. Okay, so, well, I would go further than Lord of the Rings. It's the Tolkien Legendarium, so everything related to Middle-earth, which would be, the Silmarillion is my number one, the Silmarillion being the prequel, and then Lord of the Rings, which just, oh my gosh. Yes.
You like the Silmarillion?
I do like the Silmarillion more than Lord of the Rings. It is hard at first because of the names and getting used to like the Sindarin versus the Quenya Elvish names. Is a lot more in there than I can see you staring at me than Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is great though too, and I love it. It was my introduction to Tolkien, but yeah. With Lord of the Rings, I think my favorite part is the prose. The imagery that Tolkien uses is unbelievable. So a lot of people are like, haha, he uses a whole paragraph to describe like a tree. That is like crack for me. I could listen to Tolkien go on and on about his imagery and the songs in the book, and the world building is unbelievable, and he's the father of fantasy, so take your Game of Thrones and your Stormlight Archives and go run off to Child's Play. Tolkien is the master. But with Silmarillion, the characters themselves are unbelievable. If you want to talk about heroes and villains, I think the main seven, so there's 7 sons who are the sons of one of the main characters. They're called the Feanorians. And the Feanorians have maybe the best character development out of anyone in any book I've read. So in the Silmarillion, you are given sort of an explanation of how these 7 sons, the Feanorians, were before terrible things happened. And it's basically a story of their downfall. So the Feanorians, they're all different, but they're all like varying degrees of terrible people. But at the same time, you see that they came from perfection and they were these great paragons of awesomeness. And then through the Silmarillion, which is just one epic downfall, is the Silmarillion, because it's the downfall of the elves. So you get to find out like where did they come from, what led them to, you know, Elrond in Lord of the Rings. They went through a character development like crazy getting there.
I would just love to see a Lord of the Rings knowledge contest between you
And Strider? Strider would...
Okay, Strider, but I was going to say Stephen Colbert.
Okay, yes. Stephen Colbert's show, just to show him that there are people who know more about Lord of the Rings than he does. There are some jokes with my friends about how, like, so there's 2 types of Elvish languages, and in reading the Silmarillion, you learn about, like, the politics of the elves and how, like, one of the languages is, like, I don't know if I can say it, but I'm always like, make Balerians great again and use Quenya, because it's like the traditional language of the elves. And
No idea what any of these words mean.
no, I know. If anybody listening to this wants to come in and talk Tolkien with me, sit me down, I'll do it. But to me, it's just the incredible intricacy of Tolkien that is unmatched. Like, maybe it's not as detailed in like the story itself, but when you look into the legendarium that Tolkien created, I mean, his languages, he was a linguist first. He wasn't an author, he was a linguist. And so all of his stories are based on the evolution of his languages. So I think he's cooler. And you mentioned The Witcher. Witcher's great too. Read The Witcher.